Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone, and welcome to an Oz Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update tonight, the 25th of February 2014. Things are about to get very interesting if you live in the eastern seaboard, because we are likely to see a new tropical low forming in the Coral Sea. Not the one that's currently going to affect Fiji, but a new low that will form somewhere near the Solomon Islands and will start to push in a south or southwest direction towards Queensland. We'll talk a bit more about that later on in this broadcast. We also are looking at a weak low that may or may not push off the Kimberley coastline in the 7 to 10 day period as well. So we might cover that as well, but very, very briefly. But really the focus of our topic of conversation tonight will be the upcoming Coral Sea system. But before we do that, we do need to take a quick look at what's going on now, the rainfall expected in the next week, and then also what's going on in Fiji. So currently over the Coral Sea, pretty sky clear. There's nothing really there to interest us. There are some good thunderstorms happening over Western Queensland, the Western Peninsula as well, in a good little convergence area here between the northeasterly sea breeze and the northwesterly monsoonal, or northwesterly sea breeze I should say, rather than monsoonal flow. And we're getting some really good thunderstorm activity. Often happens around Florida as well, in another part of the world, in the USA, where we get those really nice thunderstorms on that peninsula region of the USA as well. So it's happening here in Queensland. As we head towards the further to the east in the Solomons, we see convection raging on there in the mix of South Pacific Convergence Zone and monsoon trough. Look at this out here. Big line of thunderstorms associated with the monsoonal trough here, and further to the east an even bigger line of thunderstorms as we head further east towards the date line associated with the South Pacific Convergence Zone. So it's really, really raging out here, and I mean this is a serious monsoon out this way, folks, and no doubt it will spawn something. And what we're looking at is it spawning a couple of things. In fact, we're looking at it spawning a tropical low out towards Fiji and another one back in towards the Solomons, and that's the one we're much more interested in. Since the world doesn't revolve around Queensland, the rest of Australia is seeing a monsoon break pattern here. The monsoon trough is now well and truly north of the continent, no doubt about that whatsoever. You can see it up here, and it's very, very weak at the moment. There's very little convergence to speak of in that trough line. There is a weak circulation out here in the near the Christmas and Cocos Islands, but really not expected to do much with that at the moment. Also, some fairly good thunderstorm activity over inland Northern Territory and also the eastern parts of, or northeastern parts of WA as well. But once again, that's all scattered shower and storm activity rather than general rainfall. So it's very hit and miss as to whether you get some of that. If you do get under some of that, you're going to get some pretty good rainfall amounts. But really, folks, the monsoon is nowhere near Australia at the moment, and the focus of activity has to be in the northeast over the next few days. So if we look at rainfall estimates tomorrow, we got some really good heavy shower and storm, scattered shower and storm activity throughout the inland parts of the Northern Territory, which is great news for them. And that's really the flow-on effect from that big inland trough over Queensland that pushed west and dumped a whole bunch of rain on Queensland, which is fantastic rain for a lot of grazers there. We're also going to see the edge of that hitting Queensland, so we're going to see a scattering of showers and storms over the west of the state, the far west of the state. And also more storms there in that peninsula region, just like we had today, tomorrow. As we head to Thursday, continuation of some very heavy shower and storm activity over inland Northern Territory. The shower and storm activity becomes a bit more isolated over Queensland. We have a lot of shower activity off the coast of Queensland, some of it making it right onto the exposed coastal fringe, and we still have a fairly good scattering of showers and storms on that peninsula. As we, just one thing to note though is the Pilbara is completely rain-free at this point in time. Friday we continue to see heavy shower and storm activity northern inland Northern Territory, and we see an increase in rainfall across the peninsula region of Queensland, and once again showers and storms remaining in a quasi-stationary inland trough here over western Queensland. And as we head to Saturday, the Queensland trough starts to weaken out. We start to see a little bit more shower activity, or very isolated shower activity, on the exposed coastal fringes of Queensland heading into the central coast as well. As we head to the Northern Territory, we see a decrease in shower and storm activity, or rainfall amounts from that shower and storm activity. However, it's still going to be scattered, folks. There's still going to be a lot of showers and storms in this region. They might even get a bit closer to the coast by the weekend as well. And the North Kimberley, we start to see an increase in activity there. Possibility of a weak circulation forming in that area over the weekend. But at this stage, we're not looking at that being suspect for cyclone development in the medium term. So in total, the next 4 days are going to produce big rainfalls, 100 to 150 millimetres over parts or many parts of the Northern Territory region, even 25 to 50 over the western parts of Queensland, 50 to 100 over the Peninsula region in that really good scattering of showers and storms. And as we head to the next 4-day period after that, we're going to see a continuation of fairly heavy shower and storm activity over the Northern Territory. This is pretty good rain, folks, considering there's no monsoon to speak of, so we're still going to see some really good rainfall. There's still a nice inland trough in here, bringing in some very moist northerly winds into the region. Now, what's of interest here is this increase in activity in the Coral Sea in that 4-day period, and that's where we will start talking about now. That's what we'll start talking about now. So I guess the first area of interest, and just to allay any fears from Queenslanders about this first system, this is the Fijian system. Now this is very long way away from Queensland. This is at around about near the date line, so it's a long way away and not going to impact in any way, shape or form, not even in the form of extra swells on Queensland at any point in its future. So really, folks, this one is one for WA, I should say, furthest thing from WA. This one is certainly one that Fijian people should be aware of, and you can see it here, a little bit of banding coming in. It's not really well defined just yet, but most guidance does develop this system, picks it up and develops it and pushes it southeast. So you can see when I just showed you just before on that satellite, there was a fair bit of banding coming in from the north on that system, and you can see here that the strongest winds are definitely well north of the centre, and not too much happening in the southwestern quadrant. So with that system, it is very much a northward stacked system, and so we're seeing most of the weather and also the winds coming from the north. Now if we have a look at some of the ensemble guidance for this system, the GFS is a little bit all over the shop and keeps it out here. Look, it's not going to come back to the west towards Queensland. Don't worry about that one. This one will push towards the southeast. Probably most likely scenarios push towards the southeast. And the Canadian CMC ensemble actually has a better grasp on the system than the GFS does, believe it or not. And you can see there pretty clear-cut evidence there that it's going to push southeast a fair way away from, I mean, it's already so far away from Queensland, but even further away. I guess the biggest threat with the Fijian system is because it's going to be slow moving over the next few days. It's really going to dump a lot of rain in the area. Now, if we look at tomorrow morning, it really hasn't moved anywhere. It's still not a cyclone just yet. As we head towards tomorrow night, we continue to see it. It just sort of sits there right near the major Fijian islands, and it sort of does that now for a few days, and so it's just going to dump copious amounts of rainfall on large parts of Fiji. And so we're now looking 3 days ahead, and the system really hasn't done anything. It hasn't really formed, it hasn't really developed either. Now if we look at the GFS in comparison to the Euro just there, and you can see the system here, fairly loose, raggedy looking thing at the 3-day mark. And so we don't see too much development of the system in the 3 days period, but as we head towards day 4, the system does start to show more signs of developing gales to the east, and does start to go on that move towards the south or southeast, away from the major Fijian islands. Now, in the meantime, though, for the next 4 days or so, it's dumping copious amounts of rain on that region. So you could be looking at falls in excess of 400 or 500 millimetres over the next 4 days over those those are the major Fijian populated islands. So so that's why I guess it is certainly a system to note. Just even though it's not going to be very intense over the next few days in terms of rainfall amounts, it is likely to dump a lot of it. As we head into day 5, that system does start to intensify, probably into a cyclone by that stage, but you can see here it is starting to push further and further away from the major Fijian islands. So folks, that's where we're going to leave that. We probably will not mention this system again unless it starts to show really big signs of developing into a phenomenal cyclone, in which case we will definitely mention it. But at this point in time, most of the guidance keeps it between a Cat 1 to a Cat 3 throughout its life cycle. But look, there is that much going on out there in terms of the MJO and the monsoonal surge that's out there at the moment that you know, there's not going to be too much that it's going to take, too much to get this from a Cat 1 to 3 to something more significant. But look, if it does become a more significant system, we'll cover it a little bit more. But at this point in time, there are a lot of other places that do cover this because this isn't really our area, and it's not really something we do tend to focus on, is the Fijian region. But it is important that you are aware that there is a low there. It is expected to become a cyclone, and it is expected to push southeast further and further away from Australia. Alright, let's talk about the money system. Alright, remember in the satellite imagery I showed you there was a big line, a big line of storms that goes from about the Solomons all the way southeast towards the Fijian Islands, towards Vanuatu, and then there was a second line which is where the cyclone is developing near Fiji. So we're looking now at the first line. The first line was the monsoon trough line rather than the South Pacific Convergence Zone line, and really that's the area we're looking at enhanced spin happening in the next couple of days. Now, tomorrow morning we're going to see the initial beginnings of that low pressure system somewhere just to the south of the Solomon Islands, just to the east of the Australian area of responsibility. We're going to start to see that forming tomorrow. Now, as we head towards a Thursday and Friday, so this is Thursday morning, we see the circulation not really developing. It's still fairly elongated, so until it tightens up a little bit, we're not going to see too much development of that. Then as we head to Thursday night, still not much happening with the system. It still looks like a fairly ugly looking low. And look, some of the model guidance continues to just push this into a trough system, yet some of it makes it into a more significant tropical low. Now, if we look at the GFS at the same time, Thursday night, we see that the low is located just here to the south of the Solomons, but it's pretty troughy. It's not something that we could deem as a very significant circulation. Now, if we push forward though in time to the Friday and then into the Friday night, we do start to see a little bit of tightening up of the system. You can see it here on the European, and if we look at the GFS at the same time, you can see it here tightening up into a more recognized low pressure system. So up until Friday night, we got very good model agreement. We know that there's a very good chance of a low forming near the Solomons. Now, somewhere along the line after about the weekend is where things go awry, and the models go a little bit crazy with what some of the predictions, and they don't tend to agree anywhere near as much. So as we head to Saturday morning, we see this low just meandering about south of the Solomons, pushing slowly in a southwest direction. You probably can't say it's moving, it's more drifting in a southwest direction. And as we head to Sunday morning, we continue to see that southwesterly drift of the system. You continue to see it here, southwesterly drift into the Coral Sea. Not a cyclone as of yet, as of Sunday. And if we look at the GFS there, now the GFS, bear in mind, sometimes does develop things a little bit quicker than we would expect, but even that is not overly interested. Now, if we look at conditions on Sunday around the system and we look at wind shear, we can see that shear values in the Coral Sea are very low to moderate, so conditions are reasonably good for its development shear-wise. And if we look at the humidity values in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, which is very important, probably just as important as wind shear, we see that the area lies in some fairly moist environments. So look, if the circulation tightens up here on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, there's a fairly decent chance that this can develop into a cyclone and can intensify. But if it really needs to tighten up while the conditions are good for it, because conditions do become a little less favourable after about days 7 to 10 sort of thing. We get a little bit more wind shear and a lot more dry air in that region. So it does have a period now, a window now, of from the moment it forms tomorrow until the moment, until probably about 7 days time, where things are pretty favourable for its development. Now as we head towards Monday morning, we see that the system continues to track in a south to southwest direction in the European, and if we look at it on the GFS, we continue to see pretty well a slow meandering of the system, not really moving anywhere on the GFS, which is a little bit interesting, considering that the upper level winds, and if we look at the upper level winds in the region, you're going to see that the upper level winds are fairly light and coming from north to south or northeast to southwest. So the upper level flow is very light, but if we look at the mid-level flow, we're going to see that the mid-level flow has a really big northwesterly bias. So you can see the arrow sizes here on your screen. The arrow sizes show us how strong the winds are 3 kilometers above the atmosphere. Now you can see here that the arrow sizes are fairly large coming from the north, and they're fairly small or much smaller coming from the south. Now the reason, the net movement of this system will probably be in a more south to southwest direction rather than completely southeast, because it does have a counter steering flow from the south, but it's not strong enough to push the system due west towards Queensland. So folks, at this point in time, because the upper level winds are very light and the lower level winds are much stronger from one direction, we would expect the system to travel in a south to southwest direction as opposed to a westerly direction, simply under the influence of the low to mid level flow. Nothing to do with any upper level troughs or anything like that at this point in time. So it is something we'll need to watch, because the low to mid level flow, especially once the system gets a little bit of height, we can see here as the system tracks in, as we head towards the Tuesday, we start to see gales developing to the south of the system, and by Tuesday night the system is pretty close to being a tropical cyclone on its south to southwesterly approach towards Queensland. And if we look at that, comparing it to the GFS model, we see the key difference in the GFS model. It keeps it much weaker and keeps it much further to the north as the system tracks through. And if we look at the more long-term GFS model, by the time it actually starts to form it, it pushes it in a much more westerly direction, and pushes it much closer to Queensland in the longer term. Eventually the longer term GFS finally weakens it before landfall. But folks, that's way too far ahead for us to be looking. So at this point in time, we know there's going to be a low there. We know its initial track was going to be fairly slow to the west or the southwest, and then the medium term track is likely to be a south to southwest track. But how close it can get to the coast is going to be very interesting, and the models do vary dramatically and significantly as to what that does. So let me show you, I've shown you the European and I've shown you the GFS. Let me show you some of the other global models. So this is the UK Met model up until day 4. So this is Saturday. The system has formed. It's a low pressure system just to the south of the Solomons, like every other model has been showing us. The UK Met model is a little bit more interested in pushing the system in a more southwest to south-southwest direction. So it does push it towards the coast of Queensland, but at the same time as it pushes towards the coast of Queensland, it also weakens it under vertical wind shear and dry air, more so dry air than vertical wind shear. So you can see here the UK Met model is predicting a very strong high in the Bight, which will push into the Tasman, and under that influence the system has absolutely zero chance of pushing southeast. It will push in a westerly direction because of that very strong ridge. Now there's a key difference there, because that ridge is nowhere near as strong in the European and it's nowhere near as strong in the GFS model, and so because of that we have the UK Met model is definitely showing a bias of a more southwesterly direction towards Queensland, or even west-southwesterly direction towards Queensland. So that's something we'll need to watch, is the strength of this ridge, because it will play a huge factor in whether or not the monsoon wins and pushes the system in a southerly direction and possibly even southeasterly direction, or whether the ridge is a little bit stronger, like the UK Met model suggests, and pushes the system in a westerly direction towards Queensland, or whether they'll both fight it out for a period and the system will remain fairly slow moving in the central Coral Sea. So it's very interesting little situation that's going to happen between these two weather systems, the monsoon, which is raging along here, and the high pressure ridge, which may or may not be as strong as forecast here. The Canadian CMC model really doesn't want to have a bar of any of this, so it just keeps a fairly broad low pressure region in the Solomon region, but really doesn't do anything with it. The WRF model, thanks to weather zone on day 6, you can just see the outline there on the Monday of the tropical low, and then on the Tuesday we can see that the tropical low is pushing in a southwesterly direction. You can just see the center of it right there where my cursor is. So you can see that it is starting to push in a southwesterly direction through the Coral Sea. But whether or not it can make it to the coast, well, that's still a long way away, and we don't want to hedge our bets on that just yet. So the Bureau of Meteorology's Access G model, you can see the low pressure system. Don't worry about this one. This one's the one we're saying will not come towards Australia. This one's the one we're watching. That starts to form on the Monday, according to the Access G. It deepens a little bit on the Tuesday, but not significantly. But as we head towards Wednesday, it definitely does show signs of deepening. And then on Thursday, we see the system really becoming a fairly deep tropical low. And then on Friday, possibly becoming a tropical cyclone off the North Queensland or far North Queensland coastline. So that is a little bit of a different scenario once again, where the system pushes a little bit further to the north as it pushes to the west. So it's pushing in a more west-southwest direction, whereas so far we've talked about it pushing in a more southwest to southerly direction in the Coral Sea. So if we look at the variability in the model guidance, we can see that overall the European ensemble expects a tropical low to be there on the Monday to the southwest of the Solomons, but there is that element of doubt in the model guidance where we could actually see the low a lot further to the west than initially forecast and a lot closer to the coast by the Monday. So that is an option there that isn't favoured, but is possible. Then by day 7 on the Tuesday, we could actually see the low has made landfall here, but we could also see it way out here to the east as well. So there's a lot of variability in the guidance out to Tuesday. So that's a lot of variability in 7 days. Overall, the model expects the low to be in this region. As we head to day 8, we can see the low remaining quasi-stationary here. We can see one of the big reasons. Remember, the UK Met had a very, very strong high here. The European's high is much weaker, and so therefore the competing influence of the southeasterlies and northwesterlies, the northwesterlies are sort of winning, and so the system continues to push more in a south direction rather than a west direction towards the coast, according to that guidance. And as we head to day 9, we see that the system is likely to still be quasi-stationary in the Coral Sea, but there's a lot of variability by then, way too much for us to be confident in any way. So we've got a coastal crossing anywhere from Cooktown through to Mackay, but we could also be seeing the system way out here towards New Caledonia. So really, it'd be pretty silly for us to talk coastal crossing regions at this point in time. And by day 10, there's really no credible guidance whatsoever on that particular system. Similar type of situation here in the GFS on the Monday. We could have the system almost on the coast, or we could have it way out here to the east. There's a lot of variability even out to day 6 there on the GFS. As we head to day 7, the system could be crossing the coast around the Whitsundays, or could be located way out here in the central Coral Sea. So I guess the one thing the models are struggling with is whether this high is going to be strong enough, and the actual steering mechanism from the high able to withstand or counteract the steering from the fairly strong monsoonal flow. So if it can do that, the system will push west and likely either hit the coast or get very close to the Queensland coast. If it can't do that and the northwest flow is too strong and the high is too weak, the system will then track in a south, and eventually once it gets this far south, it'll start tracking in a south-southeast to southeast direction as some upper level westerlies take hold of it. Also by day 9, just something to note is off the Kimberley coast, the GFS ensemble is starting to show just the potential for a weak low forming there on day 9. But at this stage, there's not too much support. There's a little bit of support there from the EC, but you can see here it's not overly strong, and it's not really trying to do too much with it other than drift it westwards. At this point in time, that's not a favoured area for cyclone development. And similarly in the European model, we see a weak low pressure system here on day 9, and then on day 10 we see that the Euro doesn't really do too much with it. There is that outlying models, or some outlying model guidance suggesting that the system lies off the Pilbara coast, but look, that's day 10 and it's a long way away, and it's already struggling by about day 6 or 7 at the moment. So just suffice to say that there might be something, and just remember we're coming into early March now. Early to mid-March is the peak in cyclone activity in Australia, so really folks, it is something that we just need to be aware of, even if it's not attached to a recognised monsoon trough. Alright, that's all we got time for. Tonight's been a big one, but because they're only being twice weeklies, I've got to make sure we cover everything. On Friday night, we'll talk more about the Coral Sea low. Hopefully by that stage, we've got an actual circulation that we're tracking, and that will make things a lot easier if we can actually track the low from then on, and the models will be a lot better at predicting it if it's a low by that stage. Now remember, some of the outlying models have the system crossing the coast around about the Monday or Tuesday, but they are outlying models. That's not the expected thing that will happen, but it is a potential scenario being shown by some of the systems. Now, if it does cross on Monday or Tuesday, it's likely to cross in the far north of the state. If it crosses a bit later in the week, it's likely to cross a little bit further to the south. The most favoured scenario at the moment is for the system to remain offshore. But let's wait and see. The Coral Sea, it's a strange beast. Thanks for watching tonight. We'll talk again Friday night.